Greetings and welcome to the Transform Podcast. It is Wednesday, March 9th, 2022, and I'm your host, Christopher Anastasio, and welcome to this 42nd episode of our podcast. Today is going to be a sort of mix of strategy and tactics at a very, very high level. I want to just kind of touch on a topic that I've yet to cover in the first 41 episodes of this podcast. In fact, the first time I even mentioned it, I believe it was on episode 40 or 41, and I kind of acknowledged that it was something we really needed to come back around to and talk about, and that is influencer marketing. Now, so up to this point, guys, we've talked a lot about using your own, your own volition, I guess you could say that's the right word, to create and generate traffic and awareness and bringing people to, let's say, your website or your social media pages or running ads or whatever the case might be, right? But today's episode is really just kind of planting the seed, not really going to get down into the granular aspects of it, not really going to talk about exactly how to execute it. We will do that at some point. We will come back to those aspects of this topic, but I think for the uninitiated, this is just kind of a 101 primer. Like, well, what is influencer marketing? Why would I ever consider it? What are the high-level mechanics of it? That kind of a situation. Okay, guys, so that's really all we're going to kind of get into in this episode. You might still hear it in my voice a little bit, kind of recovering from a bit of an illness last week, a bit of a hectic week this week, but want to stay on track as much as possible with publishing for you guys, so that's why we want to drop this episode today for you. So basically, guys, here's the deal. Influencer marketing is when you essentially leverage somebody else's account, somebody else's presence on social media. And usually when you hear about influencer marketing, you're probably talking about Instagram or TikTok. You're probably not talking about LinkedIn, Facebook, some of these other, larger scale, professionalized platforms. I mean, we're really talking mostly about like Instagram and TikTok here. It's not that that's the only place you could ever do this, but when you hear me talk about influencer marketing, you can kind of think of those platforms as really some of the best that you're going to be able to use this approach. Okay, so basically, influencer marketing is you're leveraging somebody else's presence on those platforms who has built up an audience, a bigger one than yours, and is in your space in some way, shape, or form. Is in your industry or connected to your industry. They don't necessarily have to be who you are. In fact, that could be a problem if they're the exact same type of person as you are in terms of what they're talking about and what they're offering. Well, that's your competition, and that's going to be a real problem to get them to do influencer marketing for you. But what you can do is you can kind of look around in your space for people who are, generally in that same arena. Maybe their focal points aren't exactly yours. Like, for example, if you're in finance and they're in finance, but you're kind of a real estate person and they're kind of an entity corporation person, that might be a nice partnership in terms of an influencer marketing arrangement. Okay? But anyway, without digressing too much, so basically you have a situation where you say, okay, I'm looking around in my space, I'm looking for people who have a presence that's larger than mine that I can potentially partner with or provide content to that account, to that person, to that entity, and they will promote what I'm doing. They will promote, my website, my podcast, my services, my products via their account. And they will go ahead and they will be in a situation where they can reach out to their audience and they can go ahead and promote what I'm doing to them. And often it's going to be a situation where, you're basically telling them exactly what to say. You're saying, hey, here is material, here is a post, here is a graphic, here is information, here is a caption that you can use, excuse me, in the influencer marketer, the influencer, I guess you should say, here is what I want you to post, and here is when I would like you to post it, and that sort of thing. So it's very, it can be very rigidly executed so that all parties kind of understand what's being accomplished and what's expected, right? And so basically, you found somebody in your space, they have a larger audience than yours, you make a deal with them. We'll come back to that in a second. You make a deal with them, like, hey, you're going to put up, 3 posts this month, or you're going to do 2 posts for me, and mention my company and my product or my service, whatever. And you supply them with what you want them to say, and you go from there. And you essentially piggyback on their audience, right? So the key thing here, guys, is say, okay, well, that's interesting. You know, I could definitely see where I could maybe get some mileage out of that for certain accounts that I follow, or certain people who are in my space who are bigger than me. So you're probably following in that regard. Be like, okay, Chris, well, how much does it cost? Like, what am I supposed to say to the person? You know what I mean? Like, how am I supposed to really negotiate that? Well, here's the thing, guys. That's the beauty of influencer marketing in many ways, is that it is a sort of Wild West where there's really no convention around it. I mean, it's very self-driven, right? The influencer themselves kind of, if they've been doing this for a while, they kind of have an idea of what their pricing is. They may have already set certain prices. Or if they're new at it, they may not even have a sense of how much it should cost. They may be kind of feeling out the situation a little bit, right? So now you have a little bit of room, a little bit of a gray area to negotiate in and things like that, right? So essentially, guys, the nice thing about influencer marketing is that there's a lot of room to maneuver. There's a lot of room to negotiate, and there's a lot of room to kind of find something that works for both parties, right? It's kind of the inverse of, let's say, running ads on Facebook, where you're up against, an unseen algorithm. It's spitting out bid prices and auction numbers, in terms of your keywords that you're bidding for, and you have no control over it. I mean, you don't even know if your ad's going to run, part of the time, if they even approve it, right? So it's almost like influencer marketing in many respects is kind of the flip side to other types of leverage that you can get from an advertising perspective for your product, for your service. And it just gives you a lot more room to run. And again, you're not up against the machine. You're probably talking to either a single human being, or maybe if it's an entity account, like an institution or a company, maybe there's a couple people you're dealing with there potentially. But a lot of times you're probably dealing with a personality. You're probably dealing with a human being who can, go back and forth with you and say, okay, this is what I usually charge. What are you expecting? Okay, maybe we make a deal at this number instead of that number, and that sort of thing. So that's one of the big advantages of it. Besides the fact that you're tapping into built-in traffic, you're doing so in a way that has a lot of maneuverability cost-wise, okay? So the other point that I want to make, guys, and we're going to actually wrap this podcast up. Definitely promise you this would be compact. Is the other thing to note here, guys, is when I say looking for an influencer, I don't mean finding somebody who has 3 million followers. Okay, you don't want that person. First of all, they're going to be too expensive, more than likely. Okay, but that's just too big of an audience in many respects to have the niche, to kind of give you the niche exposure that you're looking for in your area, right? So what you basically want to do is you want to look for somebody who's in what we would call in our jargon in this industry a micro-influencer. Somebody who's got, first of all, they have to have more followers than you. Okay, that's kind of the first criteria. But then it's kind of like, okay, let's say you've got an account going for a while, you've got several hundred followers, but you've tapped out that market. I mean, you've been already messaging to them and so forth, and there's nothing more to be gained there in terms of, new business from that audience, right? So you're like, okay, it's time to go to an influencer, right? So if you have several hundred followers, now you want to look for somebody who's got, at least a few thousand, I would say. I probably would start looking in like the 2,000 to 4,000 range, and I would go up to maybe no more than 10 to 15,000. I mean, you're really looking for someone who's got a very tight but large enough dedicated, interested audience that they listen to that influencer, they've been following that influencer. The influencer is narrowed down enough that they can reach that audience fairly easily, and that audience sees their output as actionable. Okay, now I know I said before that you're maybe looking for somebody in a slightly broader range than, let's say, what you do, or somebody complementary to you. So it's like you got to find the right fit. It's like, hey, if you're the real estate guru and you're looking for the corporation guru, now you got to look for somebody who's the corporation guru, who's in that zone of 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 followers, right? Not somebody who's got 5 million followers and has a gazillion views on YouTube and doesn't really do business with anybody individually. That firm, that entity is way too far out there for what we're talking about here. We're really talking about people who are reachable, who have a reachable audience, who have a micro-sized audience compared to these the big kids on the block, and can really kind of move the needle for you. If they go out to their audience, and remember, their word counts, so they have a higher conversion rate than, let's say, what you might get in a normal cold kind of situation. So if you find a micro-influencer has 15,000 followers and they say, hey, look, go check out Business X's service on real estate investing, they're probably going to get like a 10, maybe 20% turn on that that advice or that recommendation. So now all of a sudden their 15K audience, you've got 1,500, maybe 3,000 people coming over to your account and saying, hey, let me check it out. So-and-so said to come over and check it out. Maybe it even goes higher. I mean, if it's a really dedicated audience, you could see a conversion higher than those numbers, right? So, but even at that level, like 10%, 20% conversion, interest rate, I think that's a really big deal for a small business, especially that, let's say, starting out on social media, has a couple hundred followers, and really needs to get some exposure, but doesn't want to get caught or get totally enslaved to the big Facebook machine, or in terms of running ads or whatever. And you want to try something a little bit different, okay? So I really think you guys should take a look at this. Like I said, we're going to wrap this up here, but this is something that I think you guys, it's really worth looking at closely and saying, okay, what can I do in the influencer marketing space? Is it a strategy that I can utilize and really take advantage of and get some traction out of? Okay, guys, so kind of wanted to drop this seedling for you. Think about it. If you have any questions about it, you guys want to consult with us about it, of course, we're open to that. Come over to Facebook or LinkedIn for Pransform. Come over to our website, pransform.com, and we'll definitely have a conversation with you about it. But think about it, guys. Influencer marketing, definitely a tool that should be in your toolbox at some point or another. I think, obviously you have to have something, worth offering that an influencer is going to feel comfortable touting to their audience. So you have to be squared away there. But I think once you are, then you can really do some interesting things. Okay, guys, so we're going to wrap this up here. We'll be back with you again later this week. Again, probably a fairly economical episode when we do it. But just kind of wanted to get this out there, guys, and I realized, last episode of the one before, never even talked about this. Okay? So want to thank you guys for listening. Subscribe, like, share the podcast, any of the above, or all three. And we'll be talking to you guys again later this week. All right? Thank you so much. This is Christopher Anastasia with Pransform signing off. Bye-bye.